Good evening, everyone. I'm an addict recovering from the disease of addiction, and the name on my driver's license is Paul. The first thing I like to do when I speak from the front of the room is I ask everybody to just take a moment to invite the God of their understanding into this conversation. And now I'll explain why I just said what I did. I'm a believer in our literature, and our literature tells us in the group pamphlet that that's how I'm introducing myself, to introduce myself, right? My name is inconsequential because we're all one and the same. And I've always thought about saying that, my name's inconsequential, but I'm afraid one of you motherfuckers will ask me to spell it. Right? And we ain't having that. And I ask you to ask God into this conversation because I don't feel at any time, place that I am qualified to carry the message of Narcotics Anonymous. But if you come into a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous with an open heart and an open spirit, the message is carried between words. You'll hear something that somebody says, and you'll drift off into meditation. And sometimes that meditation is that motherfucker. Right? Sometimes you're off into meditation talking shit in your head about what's going on with the speaker. Right? And, whenever I hear NA as such, I think, ought never be organized. And if you want to know whether we're organized or not, I wasn't late because I was late, but this fucking meeting started before you had a second speaker. Right? I was outside, they said, hey, we need you to speak on this topic. All right, when? 5 minutes ago. And, so like, when his timer starts clicking down, I'm like, oh, what the fuck am I going to say? And there are two parts, or actually there's multiple parts to the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. NA as such. We are a fellowship first. Because our recovery depends on, all the steps, all the traditions, all that, our unity. It can't be good for you. It can't be good for me if it's not good for us. And that goes in everything. And we're not supposed to be organized. We pay people to be fucking organized for us.
Yes.
Right? Like, shit happens in our lives, and we don't need people to be organized. We need them to love, to care, to carry the message of Narcotics Anonymous. Recently, I'm digress a little bit. Anybody that tells you that your best day using doesn't compare?
What?
Anybody that tells you that your best day using does not compare to your worst day clean has not lived fucking life. The worst moments in my life happened while I was clean.
Yes.
I've lost 2 kids. I've lost a wife. I've been in a room with 12 people that I care for as they took their last breath. And that's a reward of recovery. Because that's what fellowship is about. We, as a fellowship, and I'm going to say this a lot, we is the most important word in the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. It's not God. Because God's here waiting for you to show the fuck up. And until there's 2 of you, there's no Narcotics Anonymous. There's no NA as such. Right? What's going on in my life presently is my wife got diagnosed. It's a big, long word, but it's actually a few words. But she has microbrain brain bleeds. And doctors are messed up. Because they say, yeah, we'll see you in fucking May. Right? Well, this disease can cause stroke, Alzheimer's, all this stuff. And as such, I call my sponsor. Because I'm afraid I'm not good enough. We are. And they're his words. I've been with 12 people. NA has always showed up. NA as such is the loving and caring people that swoop you up. At least 3 people since Thursday that are here lost loved ones. Right? One cat lost his wife and showed up today. And NA as such, it's our job to swoop that motherfucker up.
That's right.
To tell him that the answer to the problems that he's feeling, not the physical, all that other stuff, the ones that he's feeling, the emotional, spiritual, and mental pain that he's in, the answer is in the steps. You know, we have to understand what we're powerless over, and we need to be reminded by people, the NA as such. You know, because people, you know, when I got here, I was, you know, and I've been around for quite a fucking long time. You know, and when I got here, it took me a couple years to realize that the first step didn't say that I was powerless over drugs. It said I was powerless over my addiction. My addiction has a name, and its name is Paul Kling. That's my full fucking name, and I don't care who knows it. You know, my wife knows it. She's out there. You know, but NA as such is there's nothing more powerful than one addict sharing their experience, strength, and hope with another. You know, we tell bizarre fucking lies like it's going to be okay.
That's right.
Right? And, you know, like, you lose a wife, you lose 2 fucking kids, that's never going to be okay. Right? NA as such tells me that I can be. That I can find freedom from my active addiction. I can find freedom from the thing that I'm powerless over. And it's one thing, and it's me. You know, I talked to a gentleman in the front, just walked in the front of the room. He and I were talking yesterday, and somebody asked me about a year, 2 years ago, how many people I think I've helped over the last 4 fucking decades being in recovery. And I lied to them and I told them 1. And that person being me. And the reason that's a lie is because I am incapable of helping myself. And if I am incapable of helping myself, how can I help anybody else? That doesn't mean that my higher power, who I choose to call God, has not used me as a vehicle. Right? But it had nothing to do with me. Right? NA as such. You know, they talk about NA meaning a whole lot of things, meaning never alone, never again. You know, when I got clean, we talked about, we weren't politically correct. We talked about, if your balls fall off, you pick them up, you bring them to a meeting, and you put them on a table, and you share about them. Then our egos got involved, and we said, if your balls fall off, right, you pick them up, you put them in a wheelbarrow, and you bring them to a meeting and share about them. And then you do some step work. And you realize it's okay that my balls now fit fine in a Ziploc fucking sandwich bag and still have room for my lunch. But it's not about being brave, it's about being powerless. Right? It's about depending on NA as such. Because no matter what you're going through, if you put it in that sandwich bag, you bring it to a meeting and you sit it on a table, right? If there's recovery in the meeting, somebody's going to either have some experience with it or say, hey, dude, hold on. And call somebody and say, this cat's going to be the one that you need to talk to.
That's right.
NA as such. It's a worldwide fellowship. You know, like, people don't have what we have. Right? I can go into any neighborhood, in any city, in any state or country, walk into a room and be at home. And again, I was talking yesterday, I like to be a white spot on a black piece of paper going into a meeting where I'm the only one that looks like me. Right? Because if there's recovery in that room, and every room that I've ever come into, there's recovery. Somebody will love you up. Right? And it's neat to feel like a newcomer, right? And I'm going to touch on that in a minute too, because when you go into a meeting, because nobody knows who you are. You know, when you're in your home area, right? You're like Norm from Cheers. Hey! You know, like everybody knows your name. You know, and you go into some place that they don't, and they love you up anyway. NA as such. You know, NA as such saves lives. You know, don't spare my feelings and let me fucking die. Right? NA as such. My one son died in the lifestyle, and one died from a fucking actual overdose. My last conversation with him, he said to me, Pop, I can't keep waking up in an overdose in the hospital. And I said to him, dude, you may never wake up the next time. And he didn't. And then as such, I had to turn my son over to you. Because I can't be his father and his sponsor. I can't be his father and his support system. I have to turn my will, my life over to you all. You know? And as such. You know? And you know, like people talk about, you know, if you read between the lines, dude, nothing in our fellowship is written between the lines. It's all in the black shit in all of our literature. And every time I say that, I think to myself, some motherfucker's going to come out with a piece of literature that's written in red.
Yeah.
You know, and as such. You know, we're not organized, trust me. But you wouldn't want us to be. Right? You know, and we carry our experience, our strengths, and our hope, our love, and our care. You know, we don't carry our opinions. You know, and that's not saying that we don't judge people, because we are human. You know, the difference now with when I judge people is I don't fucking tell them. You know? Like if I got something that is bothering me about somebody else, I call my sponsor. And we talk about what my part is. You know? Because NA as such, it's taught me that my part of my side of the street is the only side of the street I got to be concerned about. I only clean my house.
Yeah.
Right? When, you know, and again, when I got here, it was a lot different. I got clean the same year the basic text came out. And if you're wondering when the basic text came out, it came out in March of 1983. Right? I got clean in July. So, NA as such hasn't changed all that much. Because we had the little white book. Right? And we all said, the fuck we need that book for? We got this. Right? And for 42 years, we've been saying, oh, well, we need that new piece of literature for. We got this. Right? And just as our belief in a higher power has to grow and change on a daily basis, right? So must the fellowship of narcotics. And you'll find old people like me saying, you know, back in the day. You know, and like, it wasn't that bad back in the day. You know, they put their foot up your ass. You know, if you relapse when I was first coming in, People weren't like, it's okay. You know? And I'm going to tell you, it's not okay. My kid fucking died. Right? And NA as such gives you two options. You can be my kid, who was an organ donor, or you can be his father with 42 years clean. NA as such is what separated me from him. I was able to find NA as such and find a home. He still thought home was in the hood. You know, my understanding is he went home to help somebody. Well, not home, but back. We were from Philly originally, and he went back to help somebody with something and never made it there. I don't know if it was the first time he used, but I know it was the last time.
Yeah.
You know, and like, NA as such was there to scoop me up. You know, and like, a lot of things had, you know, again, like doctors are fucked up. You know, he was an overdose, but he was an organ donor. So the medical facilities lie to you and they say, listen, we got to do this test and this test before we can confirm him dead. And that tour took 4 fucking days. And I believe the reason it took 4 days was they needed to clear his body.
Yes.
Right? So I sat with him. I sang to him. I prayed with him. I only left his side when they said, I'm sorry, there's only a certain amount of people out in this room.
Right.
I was the only one in the room when they pronounced him dead. But the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous loved me up. The NA as such. People have no idea what I was going through. Some did. You know, some of you people have lost kids and some haven't. But we have this word called empathy. Right? Doesn't mean that you can feel what I'm feeling, but you can feel that I'm feeling.
Right.
You know, and they would call and they would send a lot of blessings. And you know, and I would get phone calls like, hey dude, I'm really sorry, I know you're going through something, but I gotta ask you a question. Because this must come first. Right? So they would ask me, I would be sitting there with my son on a ventilator. He was brain dead, but the fucking machines were keeping him alive, right? And somebody would call and ask for some spiritual guidance. And there's a whole lot of blessings in that, right? Because it gets to take you away from the pain that you're in for just a moment.
Yes.
Right? Because NA as such has taught me that my recovery must come first.
That's right.
And, you know, and we take that and we run with that. Because that doesn't mean that you leave your fucking sick and suffering family to go to a meeting, right? Because being with your sick and suffering family is recovery.
That's right.
Because we learn it here to practice it there. Right? And then as such, you know, and you know, there's been so many blessings. And NA has such has allowed God to speak with my voice. Right? On my anniversary, I think 5 or 6 years ago, I got a call at work and my wife was saying, and here comes the crying again. My wife said, I have cancer. And God spoke. It was my voice. And it was the most romantic thing I've ever said. But it wasn't me speaking. Because I was in pain. And I said to her, that is God's way of just giving me another opportunity to show you how much I love you.
Yes.
And she's outside. When they told me the first time I had cancer, I cried one time. And it wasn't because I was scared. Because God has prepared me. It was because I was grateful. Even if I died, my family would be fine. You know, they would miss me, sure. I break my voice all chops all the time. She replaced me in a month. But God has prepared me because of NA as such. Because if my balls fall off, I bring them to a meeting and I share about it. You know, when I told you about my first son dying, right? My first phone call was to my sponsor.
Yes.
When this past summer, it was the hospital called and told me he was struggling. He was the exact conversation was, "Hello, I don't know who I'm talking to, but we have somebody here that has you in their name in their phone as Pop." Right? There's two people that call him in their phone as Pop. One of them was downstairs. Right? And I had to do a number of things. I had to tell my wife that our son was in intensive care and it didn't look good. And then I had to call his daughter. Right? And then I went out and started my car, waiting for my wife to get dressed. While the car was warming up, I was on the phone with my sponsor. Because NA as such is where my fucking solutions lie. Right? And she walked out of the phone and she's out of the house on her phone. Right? Because she's on the phone with her sponsor. Right? Because I survive because of you people. I survive because of the fellowship known as Narcotics Anonymous, NA as such. You know, and it's not NA the fellowship, it's the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. NA as such. Right? The fellowship that comes first. The therapeutic value of one addict helping another.
Yes.
You know, things we were taught in the past. You know, like people that I hang around with believe that nobody in the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous should ever buy their own first basic text.
Yes.
It should be a gift from NA as such.
Yes.
Whether it's from an individual or the home group. You know, and I make this statement at places where, you know, I tell you, if you don't have a basic text, come see me. I'll make sure that you get one before you leave fucking here.
Yep.
And the cool part about NA as such is if I run out of money, my friends will fill the void. And provide that piece of literature that saved our lives. You know? Because, you know, I'm a little bizarre, probably a lot bizarre, but to me I'm just a little. So I think of the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous like the game show Jeopardy. You know, we have all the answers, they're in the literature. I don't understand the fucking question. I need NA as such to say, Alex, what is, you need a third fucking step. What is surrender? What is acceptance? What is tolerance? Because we can all be intolerant. You know? And the NA as such is just such a wonderful thing. You know, like, I've only been to like 16 or 17 states to meetings. Last year, 2 years ago, we went to England. We were in Southampton. And it's cool now because this is a time in man's history, or mankind's history, unlike any other. When I got clean, you took a quarter, you went to the payphone, right? And now payphones are exhibits in the Smithsonian, right? You wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you need to speak to an addict, right? You want to make a meeting, we all carry one of these things. You pick it up, you type in virtualna.org, and right, it's already tomorrow in New Zealand, right? There's marathons going on all the time, right? And if you're going to travel the world, right? Like in 5 weeks, we're going to go to Galveston. So this week, I'll start making virtual meetings in Galveston. So that when I go, I'm only going to be there for 2 days. One of those days, I'm going to make a meeting, right? And by the time I get there, I'll know somebody, right? Because my disease travels with me.
Yes.
Right? And NA as such travels with or without. You know, and they say NA works if you work it. No, it don't. It works fucking regardless. It'll work for you if you allow it. You know, and like NA as such is such a, it's just so freeing. You know, you can go anywhere in the world and feel the love of the fellowship. Right? And you don't even have to speak the same language. My wife went to a French-speaking part of Canada, and you know, she went onto the meeting list and she found a meeting, and she went. They didn't speak English, and somebody sat next to her and translated everything that was going on in the meeting. Right? Because NA as such, we're here to save lives, our own lives. And in the process, we may be used to help somebody else. You know, but again, I said this earlier, but NA as such is evolving. Right? It's a worldwide fellowship. You know, and we used to say stupid, we said stupid shit. Like, you know, I got here for all the wrong reasons. No, we all got here for the same reason. Because it was God's will. We say if I got what I deserved, nothing that I could have possibly done in this life or any other life could have made me deserve that I put myself through, the pain that I put myself through in my active addiction. What I deserve is exactly what the power that I choose to call God wants for me today. And I learned that from people in NA as such. You know? And back to we'll talk a little bit about the organizations. You know, we have organizations that are directly responsible to those they serve, and they serve us. They serve us as individuals, and they serve us collectively. And that goes all over. You know, and they've been so wonderful. You know, like, when I got clean, up until the 3rd edition of the basic text, for those of you who don't know, the words said, there are no musts in NA. And then now we count them. Right? And being the addict that I am, if you ask him how many there are and where they're at, I look them up on my phone. Right? And the reason that they say you should find them is not because you must do anything, but they wanted you to read the book. Right? Because the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop using. You don't even have to stop using. We pray that you come back clean. And that's in a piece of literature. But if you use today, please just keep coming. Right? You know, and I was sitting out at registration, right, and this woman came up today, and she hesitated to write down her clean time, and it was 6 days. 6 days makes me emotional. Right? Because anybody that tells you it's hard to get 42 years is lying to you. You know? It's hard to get 42 minutes, and 42 seconds, and 42 days. Because after 42 years, you're just doing what you did yesterday. Right? changing your whole way of life, right? To be part of the Narcotics Anonymous as we know it. It's tough. And again, sitting down at the table. And I love being at the table because there's some people that have great conversations. Somebody asked me what my definition of a newcomer was. Right? And I don't give opinions. I tell you that our literature says we have but yet a daily reprieve. If you do not wake up every single day and consider yourself a newcomer, you're doing something wrong. Right? Because NA as such teach me to depend on a power greater than myself, to become God reliant. Right? God reliant, fellowship reliant. Today I'm a newcomer. Because first of all, old head learn a whole lot more from young people coming into fellowship than we could ever teach. Right? And your situation in the fifth edition, on the last page of the 4-step top, the top paragraph said that God, and I'm paraphrasing, is that God will give you things in your life that will cause you to address them as a 4-step. Right? Whenever you have a major change in your life, sometimes 10's not enough. Sometimes you got to go and write down on a 4-step to deal with your guilt, your remorse, your fears. Right? Narcotics Anonymous has taught me this. And hopefully I haven't faltered on this, because I try to never say I learned. I always try to use the terms that I was taught. Right? Because everything that I speak of, someone else taught me, or I stole from them. And then I have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to talk about what I talked about in the beginning and try to wrap this up. I talked about inviting God into the conversation, and I talked about that the message appears to you with an open heart and an open spirit, right? Between words. And the first time that I came to that realization, somebody came up to me after I spoke in a meeting and said, "Dude, that was the most spiritual thing I've ever heard in my life." And they said something. I was like, you know what? It is. But I never said it. I never thought it. Right? Because that person had heard words, gone off into meditation. God delivered that message to them, and they delivered it to me. Right? All because of an open heart and an open spirit. If you go to a meeting and you come out of the meeting and you say, "I ain't got nothing out of that meeting," it's nobody else's fault but your own. Because Narcotics Anonymous is such. Sometimes the message is carried by that motherfucker. And I'm okay that you think I'm that motherfucker. I'm at peace with myself, I'm at peace with God, and my wife loves me. And the rest of you motherfuckers just have to accept me. Hopefully I was entertaining. Hopefully I carried a clear message.
As such.
As such. And the last thing that I like to share, every time I share from the front of the room, and I stole it from a friend of mine, and his name was Hank Sparks. And I use his full name because he did, and he's dead, it don't matter. Right? And he would end by saying, "I'd like to thank each and every person in this room, the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous, the God of my understanding, for helping me get another day clean. Without me, there would have just been another ass in this fucking chair, but without all those things I just mentioned, I would still be a hopeless hopeless addict called Paul. Thanks for letting me share.
All right, closing, guys. We would like to thank the speakers for sharing their experience, strength, and hope. All right? All right, please join us in reciting the Serenity Prayer. God, grant us serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference.